On today's episode, the way to inspire ownership in the people we lead. Pete Mockaitis joins me for a conversation on how to make it happen. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 303.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made, and this weekly show gives you access to the practical wisdom that will empower you to become a better leader. And one thing that you've almost inevitably heard about if you've done any thinking on how to be a better leader and how to be more effective in inspiring others is how to create ownership in the people that you have the privilege to lead. Ownership over their careers, ownership over their work, and ownership over their ability to be connected and stay connected to the mission of the organization. It's something we've all heard, and yet it is one thing that I think for a lot of us is challenging on how to really do practically. And I'm really glad today to be able to welcome a new friend who I know will be able to provide us with a ton of perspective on how to do this. And also will really get us thinking about this concept of ownership, and that is Pete Mockaitis. Pete is the host of the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. He's consulted at Bain & Company and spent thousands of hours delivering one-on-one coaching to hundreds of world-class thinkers to sharpen their communication and problem-solving skills. His clients hail from over 50 countries and world-class organizations such as Google, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, the United Nations, and Amazon. And the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast is regularly listed as a top 10 careers podcast on iTunes. And like me, he's also a fine graduate of the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. Pete, welcome to Coaching for Leaders.
Oh, thanks so much, Dave. It's really a joy to be here. It's funny. I think of us as neighbors on the top iTunes Careers podcast. Listings.
Indeed. And you and I were like literally neighbors for a while because you're a Chicagoan yourself, I know, a Midwesterner. And you and I, not only did we go to the same school, we got the same degree. We were almost there at the same time. We're almost separated at birth.
Pretty close.
Well, I'm really glad to have you here. And I've been thinking about this concept of ownership. And you have this amazing show called How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And a big part of what you are doing for your audience is helping them really to create ownership over their careers. And a lot of our audience, of course, is trying to lead with the intention of creating ownership. But even before we get into the details of this, I'm wondering, how do you see the concept of ownership? Why is it so critical?
Oh boy, why is it so critical? And I think that the answer to that is that when you have a sense of ownership, then, well, first of all, work just becomes a whole lot more fun. It's like you're not like a slave or a zombie, being sort of jerked from thing to thing under the command of someone else, but rather you feel like you have a sense of agency and purpose, and you're making it happen, and you've got something that's yours. And so not only is it just kind of more fun to experience that, but as a result, you bring forth more energy, more enthusiasm, and thus just more smarts associated with each thing you're tackling or working on. It's kind of like a universal enabler, right up there with something like a growth mindset or grit or any of those other fun concepts you and I both like to study.
Yeah, well, and speaking of some of the things we like to study, one of the words you and I had tossed around in our conversations before today was the word autonomy. And it's a word that comes from, I don't know if Daniel Pink first popularized it, but it certainly comes from the book Drive that he put out, I guess probably been almost 10 years now, and the importance of giving people an appropriate level of autonomy in their work. And part of that's really driven around the concept of ownership and the importance of having that autonomy, because a lot of times people don't have that in their careers. I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Absolutely. And it's not fun. It's one of the main reasons folks leave and decide that they care to go elsewhere. And it also ties in with a sense of sort of self-value or appreciation. People get the impression it's like, if I don't have autonomy, if I'm not trusted to have a degree of autonomy, that they must not really trust my capabilities or my worth or my value or appreciate what I bring to the table. So it could really spiral quite quickly psychologically in terms of, this place is terrible for me.
Yeah, indeed. And I know a big part of this is that beliefs oftentimes lead to the decisions that we make and the actions that we take. And you're a fan, I know, of Bandura's work. Am I saying his name right, Bandura?
Yeah, I think so. I've said it Bandura, but I don't actually know. Because I'm only reading it instead of hearing it.
Yeah, me too. I've seen his name so many times over the years. And he created this theory. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of insight into his work and just some of the thinking over how this relates to ownership.
Oh, sure thing. Yes. Well, I'm a fan of citing his work in particular when I'm discussing this topic in some of my training programs. And so Dr. Albert Bandura, if you're less familiar, he is among the most cited psychologists of all time. So a really big deal. And one of his really enduring concepts that he's promulgated is that notion of self-efficacy. The idea that our beliefs about our abilities really do go a long way toward determining how successful we'll be in any endeavor. And so in some ways, it's kind of like the psychological proven validation of if you believe in yourself, you can achieve it. Well, it's not quite that simplistic, but there really is kind of a proven, reliable mechanism by which that unfolds. And so Bandura would assert that the belief that you have, causes you to make certain decisions, which in turn drive particular behaviors flowing from those decisions, and then results from that. So the belief associated with your level of ownership in your job, career, role can have just epic consequences in terms of what's unfolding for your work experience and results there. So for example, if you have a belief that, I just have to do whatever I'm told during the hours that I'm here, well, that in turn will lead to some decisions like, well, there's really no point in establishing the plan or priorities for the day. I just got to rush to put out the next fire. And then you'll just kind of do whatever's latest and loudest, to borrow some David Allen terminology, that shows up urgently in your world. And then as a result, you're just kind of stressed and not particularly effective because you're not planfully doing the things that make the biggest impacts. Whereas if you have a belief like an owner, you'd say, hey, this little piece of the world, it's mine. I own this area of responsibility. It's like my baby. And as a result, you start making wise decisions like, well, shucks, I've got too many things to do and not enough time to do it. So I've really got to get smart and prioritize about what are the key actions that are really going to drive this forward in the most meaningful way. And then you go ahead and do those actions. And sure enough, you have some fun because you have some results. You look like a winner. There's praise and appreciation and results and hopefully, promotions and more money and responsibility, advancement and good stuff like that. So I think that's just one illustration how the broad principle of Dr. Bandura speaks about in terms of self-efficacy really shows up powerfully in the beliefs you have associated with what ownership you have over a realm of work.
And I'm really curious in the people you've interviewed, because you've interviewed so many experts on careers over the last few years. What do you find that you see leaders do well around creating that dynamic, that expectation, or even the environment where people feel like they can really tap into ownership more effectively?
Oh, that's a great question. Really, three guests are coming to mind right off the top of my head here, and so I'll speak about each of them and what they had to share along the lines in terms of how that ownership materialized and then made a world of difference. And so the first one is Arthur Woods, and he's one of my first guests because he's a buddy. They'll say yes before you have a following. So thanks again, Arthur. And so he is a co-founder of this fascinating company called Imperative. And at Imperative, they are all about purpose. Figuring out that the purpose-driven workforce, the difference purpose makes for individual employees and leaders, and share price and all that good stuff. And so they were looking at some fascinating studies in their research, which they saw that what you might consider the lowest level in terms of compensation or educational requirements, credentials required to get a profession in a hospital is, custodial staff, the janitors, the folks who clean things up. And yet they saw just a skyrocketing level of job satisfaction and performance in terms of cleanliness and all that good stuff when the custodial staff started taking real ownership associated with the health outcomes of the patients themselves. And you think, well, how do they really have an influence there? Isn't that kind of the doctors and the nurses and the PAs and the providers? But in fact, once they saw that as their job, they would proactively ask questions like, do you like this artwork in here? Is this working for you? Oh, that's no good. Well, why don't we swap it out for something else? What do you like? You like trees? You like mountains? You like water? You like people? And so then the patients felt more cared for, and the custodial staff felt more engaged and a sense of ownership there. And they had superior health outcomes where that's happening. So from a leadership perspective, I just think that's so powerful, is if you can tell that story, that you can make the connection between what they're doing and what ultimately is the impact, the result, the mission-based goodness associated with it. It's so good, as well as offering some of that autonomy. I'll tell you, my very first job was when I was working at Kmart. And I'm in the pantry section in high school. They called me Pantry Pete over the intercom, and they couldn't resist.
Nice.
Alliteration. And so one of my favorite parts of the training, I was such a dork for this leadership stuff even back then. One of my favorite parts from the training was like, as a Kmart employee, you have the power to please. Like, ooh, I like the power. Tell me more. And so that was that. If someone wanted a 24 a case of Pepsi, which was on sale, but shucks, we were out of them. Well, we could give them 2 12s at the 24 pack price. I thought that was so cool that I sought out any opportunity I had to exercise this power. And in fact, when I had to write down in my calendar instead of work, I would write down EPP, exercise power to please. That was me in high school, because I was into it. I was like, that's pretty cool what I can do and how people are surprised and delighted as a result.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you were doing this already. I mean, so many organizations would love to have folks that were hiring in roles at high school and college students who were thinking like that. And yet that's not the norm, right? You're probably an outlier. On that.
In a number of ways, Dave.
It's firmly established, right? So one of the things that I'm curious about is what you described in Arthur's organization as far as getting the janitorial staff to really be thinking about the mission of the organization. And I think a lot of us hear that and we're like, wow, we'd love to have an organization like that. We've all heard stories of organizations like that. What did they do that actually got people thinking that way?
Well, I think there's a couple things, and I think largely it's about telling stories and sharing the connection and the potential research and saying, holding up the exemplars, like, hey, take a look at what this person did, and that was really cool for the folks over there. And another thing I consider in terms of a podcast guest was Jeff McManus, who is the leader of the groundskeeping staff at Ole Miss, the university. And so,
I've heard of him.
Yeah. So he was a great interview, and he made the point there that folks really got more engaged and their turnover was reduced when he again told the story and connected that importance of their work to something bigger. And it was pretty simple. He's like, all right, look, there is a wealth of research that suggests that the physical appearance of the campus is a major consideration when someone is visiting the school on whether or not they will in fact enroll at the school. So we are shaping the very future of this institution based on the students who choose to enroll, largely based on how well you plant those flowers.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And like you said, the research is there to support it. So the challenge, I think, for a lot of leaders is we may wish for that. We may want people to make those connections. But there's the fallacy, I think, that a lot of us make, I know I have, is that people are going to see that and they're going to make the connections themselves. And you've used the word storytelling a couple of times, and I've always been a fan of the fact that storytelling is the language of leadership. And so the willingness for a leader to tell the story and engage and to help people to make the connections that they may not otherwise see themselves, sounds like it's really critical.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
One of the pieces that causes people to not feel like they have ownership, and both you and I have experienced this and many people do in their careers, is micromanagement, of course. And most of us, when we think about the poor leader we've had at some point in our career, we think about the person who micromanaged us. And I'm wondering how you have seen this come up in your conversations with guests and thinking about and coaching people on career strategy. How do you see this emerge, and what, if anything, do you find is helpful in helping people to navigate around that?
Oh, sure thing. Well, in terms of sort of guest insights on that first, I just thought about, from a leader's perspective, it's like the long-term effects of micromanaging are very dangerous and spooky, not just in terms of people who up and leave because they're no longer interested in this work environment, but also, I believe it was Pam Fox-Rollin, one of my guests, who talked about transitioning into a new leadership role. And she mentioned that if you are micromanaging or dismissive of input or feedback from others, then pretty quickly folks just kind of stop talking, and then you find yourself in the position of being the only one who's thinking, who's able to use your brain, and instead of just kind of following procedures and checklists and frameworks. And that's a pretty scary place to be. Like, it is all on your shoulders, and all of the wisdom of team is not emerging. It's not flowing around and passing into your noggin. And that's pretty scary to have that all on your shoulders. So I think that's one guest insight for how it shows up and the spooky impact. As to your other perspective, when it comes to what are some great ways to avoid that, I think two things come to mind first. And one is just a very simple way to get yourself comfortable in advance with some of that delegation. And just imagine, like, under what circumstances will you be fine with what comes back to you? And the way that often gets articulated is, you can do this any way you want, so long as X, Y, and Z, or blank, blank, and blank. And so I think it's really great to pinpoint that as, like, folks really are not going to do it the way that you would do it. And to get some comfort with that, it's like, but you know what? That's okay, so long as the critical things work. Like, all laws and health and safety protocols are followed. It's done by Wednesday, July 14th. I'm not sure if that's a Wednesday or not, but and it is done in a professional manner that is congruent with our design standards in our slides or Excel or whatnot. And so, if you can just think about, what are those critical components that really make or break your view on whether or not it's successful, and write those down, define those clearly, and then share those, and then let go of the rest. And that's kind of the hard part for many folks, is like, it's not my way, and therefore it's not right. And I think there's quite a distinction. There's many things that are right that are not necessarily precisely the way we would do it.
You said something so critical there, which is to write it down. And that is something that I've seen a lot of leaders struggle with without knowing they're struggling with it. And they'll have a piece of work or a project or something that they need to delegate, and they start the process of delegation by setting a meeting with that person and explaining it as they go, rather than having stepped back and taken a half hour, a day, a week, depending on the complexity of the project and how much visibility it has and how important it has, and really thinking through, what are the clear expectations and the guideposts and the time frame that come along with doing this project. And then and then actually sitting down with that person and not having a conversation about how to do it, but a conversation about the objectives and the expectations, like you were saying, Pete. And then they put together the plan. They put together the tactical plan versus it coming from the person who's got more experience doing it. And there's just so many good things that come out of that. And the reason I know that a lot of people don't do it is it takes more time. It takes time to think about it in advance of what am I going to communicate as far as expectations? What are the guidelines? What are the check-in points? It's a lot easier, at least in the short term, to just sit down and have the meeting versus sit down and actually go through that thinking.
Oh, certainly. And I think that's one sticking point is folks not taking the time. I think another sticking point is folks don't quite have faith in the colleagues who are receiving the delegated responsibility in their capability to execute the how. And they're like, this isn't quite going to be right because he or she isn't quite familiar with generally how we do this or how this is done and is supposed to unfold. And I think that in the world of micromanaging, I think in some ways a level of guidance is necessary, and sometimes a lot of it, even though there's leeway. And one of my biggest aha moments, I think, in this game was realizing that the delegation, doesn't quite have to be an all-in-one shot kind of a move in terms of it's either all mine or it's all theirs, and even without micromanaging. And so there's a few steps in the middle, and someone laid this out for me in terms of, step one could just be, hey, watch me do this. Take a look at how this goes down. And the second could be, help me do this. I'm going to do most of it, but you're going to chime in with some key areas. And then let's do this together collaboratively, followed by, I'll help you do this, do the majority, and then I'll step back and watch you do this. And so I think that's a pretty helpful gradient just to step it down off of your plate and onto someone else's plate without a great deal of precision micromanaging, but conveying, hey, all the stuff that you need to know in terms of the hows that you don't yet know, we're going to get that progressively downloaded into your capability set.
I was thinking about a grid from what you were just saying that I put together years ago for a client project. And we were talking about this problem, which almost every manager has had, which is you see someone about to make a mistake and you know they're going to mess something up. What do you do? How do you approach that? Do you step in? Do you rescue them? And we put together this grid, and on one side was, is it a minor issue or is it a major issue? And on the other side, it was, are they aware of it or are they not aware of it? And the only place that we could really make a case where it made sense to step in and to really take over and to rescue the person is if it was a major issue that was going to, be disastrous for the company or for the project, for the customer, whatever, and the person wasn't at all aware of it. But the other three, if it's a minor issue, is just to let it go. Like, it's so important for people to have, and in fact, it's so much more important for people to have ownership than it is that they do it perfectly. Because, or how you would do it. Because if they have ownership over it, they have all the things you and I have been talking about. But if it's just being micromanaged, then they're just executing someone else's plan. They don't necessarily feel personally connected to it. And even if it's in a major issue, but they're aware of it and they know it's a problem, they ultimately still maintain control over it. They are still the person that it's delegated to. And yeah, we're working with them. Of course, we're coaching them. We're interacting and we're supporting them perhaps daily. But yet they still have ownership over resolving it, because that's the thing that's going to help them to develop that skill set, which is going to make them ultimately better at it than we are.
Absolutely. And it's a long-term plan for your sanity in terms of being able to let go of the perfection associated with all of the output, all of your teammates are generating. And I'll tell you, Dave, it's so funny. Lately, I don't know if I'm reading the 80-20 principle or essentialism or the one thing, but these works about prioritizing, as I read them, I just find them so soothing. It's like, I don't really have to do everything. 20% of stuff will provide 80% of value, or even better, 20% of that or 4% overall will provide 64% of the value. And so that just really helps me take a breath and just get clear in terms of, all right, we don't need to stress about everything getting done or everything getting done near perfectly. We only have to stress about a very small proportion of things getting done outstandingly. And so let's do that. And so for the other things that just sort of need to happen, well, that really makes me feel like I have a wide latitude of, sure, whatever you do is totally fine.
Yeah, and as long as it, of course, goes through the framework of meeting the objectives and all the things you had talked about earlier as far as being in the right frameworks. But how you do it, I've had more times than not, I've discovered in my career, someone comes up with a better way to do it or more creative way than I probably would have done.
Oh, yes, good point.
And so that just doesn't happen otherwise if you don't give people that opportunity to do it. And it's a challenge, I think, for especially new leaders too. You've been at this a while, and you get that perspective of the importance of like not trying to do everything, and yet the new leader, I think a lot of times is the person I find that really is struggling with this. They're 6 months or a year into their role, and a lot of times they became the leader, the manager of their organization because they were the best person at the previous job, and they got moved up into that role, and they do it better than everyone. Sometimes literally, like they literally were the best person in the organization doing all these jobs. And now it's not their job anymore. They may show up in the same organization. They may wear the same uniform. They may go to the same location. They may literally have the same desk, but it's not their job to do the work anymore. It's their job to lead the people and be responsible for the people who are responsible for the work. And that is, at first glance, may seem like a subtle difference, but it's a massive difference as far as the work that they're doing on a daily basis. And it becomes so essential to be thinking about, how do I give ownership and delegate effectively and create a framework where people can be really successful?
It's so true. It's so true. And I think that that's the risky zone, just because you're so close to it. You're so familiar with it. I think that as you get more and more senior, it's like, I don't even quite know the details for how that thing works. So you please just handle it. Because I don't want to start, going under the hood of all that complexity, because I know you've got it handled. Whereas when you're just freshly graduated from that set of responsibilities, you're like, oh, I know how to do this and I can do it really well. And why don't I just hop in right now? It's a tempting but disrupting kind of a tendency to be mitigated.
And it's a great place to get, where people who are on our team, who we lead, know more about it than we do. And I know that's a fear for a lot of early leaders, a lot of early managers. And yet that's a wonderful place to be, because it means that you've done exactly what you're supposed to do, which is to develop the talent in your organization. It's really exciting when you get to that point, because you can do so much more. And then you can do the things that the work of a leader, really should be doing, is thinking about doing the storytelling, setting the vision, setting the strategy, all the things we talk about so much on the show. It's not that we don't do the other things too, but it's the focus. It allows us to really spend our time there to do the work that is so critical for the organization.
Absolutely, it is. And often so hard to find the time to do that with so many, meetings and emails and, Slack conversations, or just pieces of input that are all kind of get a little piece of us, that it's sort of like the gains associated with being able to let go of a little more work can be massive, because the time that it liberates is the cool, creative, strategic time that can make a huge leveraged difference.
Speaking of cool creative time, you and I could talk all day on this. And for those who are hearing some wisdom from you that I know they'll want to dive into more, there's so many great guests and conversations you're having on the show. Could you tell us a little bit about the show, and also some of the training you do that'd be helpful to folks?
Oh, Dave, yes, thank you. I'd love to. Well, so the show is called How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And the premise is that I'm interviewing folks who have something to say that can sharpen the universal skills required for professionals to flourish at work. So it's so funny. Dave and I both get lots of pitches for people who want to share about their entrepreneurial journey. And Dave and I both turn down almost all of them because that's not kind of quite what we're up to. So if it's about things like developing your presence, your productivity, your thinking skills, communication skills, managing your career to find, fit and purpose and that good stuff, then we'll talk about it. And we also have a lot of fun. It's kind of an upbeat kind of a vibe. And then we talk about folks' favorite things at the end of each episode, so you can learn a lot about different, tools and books and apps and those things. So that's just been a blast and been really taken off faster than I expected, which is a blessing. The How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast. And then for training, my primary program is called the Enhanced Thinking and Collaboration Program, which is a set of modules that I deliver for a whole team in order for them to sharpen those thinking and collaboration skills. And the coolest thing I've seen there is that with the before and after evaluation survey data, on average, the typical teammate saves about 1.4 hours of wasted time a week and just eliminated. So fewer wasted meetings or wasted analyses by implementing the tools that we share. So I think that's just so exciting for the experience of work and for managers who need to prove some sort of an ROI on their training investment.
Yeah, that's nice. And one of the things I was just thinking off the top of my head here, Pete. I don't know how you feel about this. I was thinking about your audience and the Coaching for Leaders audience. Most of the people who listen to your audience are not managers, and most of the people who are part of our audience are managers. I'm betting there are probably 4 or 5 episodes from your show that would be actually really great suggestions for the folks in our audience that they could pass along to staff on a couple of key issues. And I'm wondering if maybe we could put together 4 or 5 of them that we'll put in the show notes that'd be really helpful for people to utilize on some of the specific topics. Because I know a lot of us as leaders, people come to us asking these questions that, for a whole bunch of reasons, we don't always have the time to spend, or sometimes we're looking for the right resource. And I think some of those episodes might be really good starting points for that if you're game for helping me put that together.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you. And it's just like, which one is to pick? So much fun. But yes, happy to do that. And thanks for asking.
Nice. Well, I got one more question for you. I didn't warn you I was going to ask you this question, so we'll hear what you think on it. Leaders are always learning and growing. What's the biggest leadership mistake you've made, and how have you grown from it?
Oh, sure thing. I think the biggest leadership mistake that I've made probably multiple times is that I just operate under the assumption that other people sort of think and operate just the way that I do. And in particular, when it comes to having their stuff kind of under control. So it's funny, we've talked about ownership, and my preferred way to work is that I just own it all. I've got it and I run with it, and then it's handled. And if someone sort of prompts me or checks in with me, I might feel even a little bit irritated. Like, you don't think I'm on top of this, Dave? Come on, back off. I've got it under control. Whereas that is absolutely not universal for folks. Many people very much appreciate the check-in. I think that has been a recurring challenge. And so I've made a real effort to kind of put times in on the calendar and be more wisely proactive about my ongoing engagement to folks I'm leading.
I appreciate you sharing that a ton. I can certainly relate to that as well. And it's just a reminder in that delegation process. One of the questions I get a lot from new leaders especially is, well, how often should I check in? I don't want to be the micromanager that I didn't, I had 5 years ago. And one of the things we'll talk about, right, is like, have you asked? Have you set up the expectation when you do the delegation, when you set up the project of how much would you like me to check in? And to your point, Pete, some people want it a lot, and that will really help. Some people don't want it at all, and we may need to coach a little bit depending on who that person is and how much experience they have. But if you have that conversation up front, you set those expectations. It's so much easier to navigate that when you do the check-ins or not, and it makes just a better experience for everyone. Wow, I have so much to tell you about here at the end of the episode, so stick around for another minute or two. A bunch of information coming your way. First of all, thank you to Pete, and we mentioned during the conversation that Pete and I were going to put together 5 episodes from the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, which would be helpful to those of you who are leading teams. We've done that. The list is at coachingforleaders.com/303. That's the show notes for this episode. But don't worry about writing that down, because you can access that link just by checking it out in the weekly leadership guide that you get on Wednesday. Usually the link to the show notes is the very first thing in the guide. Check that out. If you click on it each week, it'll take you right into all the resources, everything that you need to know in order to get the most value out of the episode and to link up to the resources that we've mentioned. So check that out on Wednesday or right now if you'd like. And I also hope that you'll activate your free Coaching for Leaders membership, especially if you've just been listening maybe for the last few months or maybe even the last 6 months or a year. Maybe you're picking up the show for the first time. If you are, welcome, by the way. Activating your free Coaching for Leaders membership is probably the best way to get insight on some of the conversations we've been having on the show over the last 5-6 years, and in particular, the best conversations. Because what I've done is I've put together the 10 lessons that I think are some of the most critical ones into a 10-day free audio course. It's titled 10 Ways to Empower the People You Lead. And when you set up your free membership, you will get access to that right away. Once a day for 10 days, I will send you in your inbox a less than 10-minute lesson. It's an audio lesson you click on, and you'll get the most important lessons from the show over the last, really the last 6 years. So you can start that by going to coachingforleaders.com, activating your free membership. That'll get you started on the free audio course. And of course, there's a ton more in the free membership. The entire podcast library, searchable by topic, my entire personal library of everything I found online, searchable as well. The member cast, there's a whole bunch more that's in there. Again, coachingforleaders.com is where to set that up. And you've heard me talking about a couple meetup coming up this week, actually. I'm going to be up in San Francisco this coming Thursday evening, June 29th. This is your last chance for those of you in the Bay Area. If you'd like to join us for the free meetup, at the time I'm recording this, we do still have a few seats available, but it may fill by the time the event goes live. If you're interested in joining us for a 2-hour event this coming Thursday evening, June 29th, 2017, and you're in the Bay Area, go to coachingforleaders.com/San Francisco, all one word. It is a completely free event. We're going to have a ton of fun, a ton of activities. I'm really looking forward to meeting many of you in person who are Coaching for Leaders listeners in the Bay Area. And now, in addition, I'm also announcing a meetup coming up in Denver in the month of July, Monday, July 24th, 2017. If you are in the greater Denver area, I hope that you will join me for a meetup that evening, Monday, July 24th. It will be in the evening somewhere in the greater Denver area. This one, we do not have a location yet, but if you're interested in attending and getting together with a number of other Coaching for Leaders listeners, go over to coachingforleaders.com/Denver. Let me know you're interested in attending the event by doing a free RSVP. And once we get the location, we will let everyone know who's RSVP'd. By the way, if you're in the Denver area and you're interested in attending and you know of a location that you think would be good for us to get a group of Coaching for Leaders listeners together, I would love your input. You'll see a link on the page to be able to reach out to me directly. Also, if you're in the Denver area and have access to a room or would be interested in hosting us, I'd love to chat with you. Just go again over to coachingforleaders.com/Denver, and I look forward to meeting you on Monday, July 24th. And another meetup is hopefully coming up in August here in Orange County. Never done a meetup here in Orange County. I'm not sure why, but I was realizing should probably do that. So I don't have the date nailed down exactly for that, but if you are here in Southern California, be listening for the next week or two on a date coming up in August 2017. So I'm looking forward to meeting so many of you in the next couple of months. It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, speaking of things that can support you going forward, I hope that you also check out some of the related episodes to today's conversation. Pete and I talked a little bit about delegation on the show and the importance of using an effective delegation process. If that's intriguing to you and you're not maybe sure what to do exactly around how to delegate and the steps to follow to ensure that you get the message across, but you're not micromanaging, I would highly recommend listening to episode 117. On that episode, I walk through the 7 steps you need to follow to delegate work. It walks you through exactly step by step how to delegate effectively so you get the results you're looking for, so you give people ownership over their work like we talked about today, and how do you do it by avoiding micromanagement. It's one of the principles I talk about in that episode. 117 is again the one to check out. Also, please check out episode number 148. In that episode, David Hutchins and I talked about the 4 stories leaders need for influence. We talked a little bit about storytelling in this episode as well. In that episode, David and I talked about what are the 4 key stories that you need to be telling as a leader on a consistent basis in order to influence people well. If you haven't heard that episode, the framework will be really helpful to you in thinking about how to utilize storytelling effectively in order to get your message across to be a benefit to people and the organization. And then also episode 302, last week's episode, how to challenge directly and care personally. If you haven't heard that one yet, Kim Scott and I talked about the principle of radical candor. She's the author of the book by the same name. If you're looking for ways to be even more effective at that, definitely check out episode 302 because it'll be helpful to you. You can access all those episodes just by going to coachingforleaders.com/the episode number. Now, I have one final call to action for you. A few Q&A episodes that are coming up. Actually, 3 Q&A episodes that are coming up. Bonnie and I are doing our normal monthly Q&A show next week, so be watching for that. You can always submit questions to us by going to coachingforleaders.com/feedback. And in addition to that, there are 2 more Q&A episodes that are going to be coming up this summer in addition to our normal Q&A episodes on the first Monday of every month. One of them is going to be with Joe Knight. Joe was back on episode 244. He is the author of the book Financial Intelligence. And Joe and I got together on that episode. We talked about what are the key principles that leaders need to know around finance, the numbers, business reporting, all those things that we all know we really should know more about in most of our organizations, but a lot of us don't know nearly as much as we should. And Joe and his team have put together some fabulous books and resources around that. I certainly check out episode 244, but Joe's going to come back in the next couple of months. And this time, rather than us talking about the principles in the book, he's going to be taking our questions. So if you have a question on business acumen, numbers, financial reporting, accounting, he is the person to answer your question. So go over to coachingforleaders.com/feedback. You can submit your question to us. Let us know it's for the Financial Intelligence Show, and I'll get your question in front of him. We'll pick the best questions that will be helpful to most people. So check that out. And also, coming up in the next month or two, Kwame Christian is going to be here. He's an expert on negotiation, and we're taking questions on persuading others, dealing with difficult people, and how to say no. So if any of those are resonating with you, again, go to coachingforleaders.com/feedback and submit your question. That's the way to get questions in for all of these. Just let us know which topic it's for, and we'll be sure to tackle that when the show comes up. So, gosh, that's a lot, huh? But it's a fun summer going on here. We got lots happening. The Coaching for Leaders community continues to grow. I'm really thrilled to be continuing to bring the show to you each week. So much more coming in the coming months. And I'm looking forward to meeting so many of you at the meetups. Next week, Bonnie is back. We're returning for our monthly question and answer show. We already have a bunch of questions for the show. However, don't let that stop you. If you've got a question related to leadership, send it in, coachingforleaders.com/feedback. We will consider it, if not for this episode, a future Q&A show. Keep your questions coming on finance, financial intelligence, finance, and also persuading others, dealing with difficult people, and saying no for that conversation we'll have on negotiation coming up. Have a great week and see you next week with Bonnie. Take care.